All right. Welcome, everyone, to our March Lunch and Learn webinar. If this is your first time with us, well, thank you for joining us, and we're so glad to see you. If you've come back again and you're joining us for another webinar, thank you for all your support and taking the time to come back and spend your lunch hour with us. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sonja Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia. I'm a condo lawyer as well as your moderator today. And before we get started on our topic today, which is going to be short-term rentals and condos, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their support. As I've said in all of our previous webinars, without the support of our sponsors, we're not able to put these webinars on free of charge for you. So thank you to Macintosh Perry, Registon Building Restoration Limited, Common Ground Condo Law, Brown & Beatty, Elia Associates Condominium Lawyers, and Nordic Windows and Doors. If you want any more information about any of these sponsors, you can just go to our website, ccihuronia.com, and on our landing page, you'll see their logos at the bottom of the page. You can click on their logos. That'll direct you to their website, or you can just go to the registration page for today's webinar. You'll see their logos there as well. And once again, you just click on their logos. It'll take you to their website. And when this recording is posted in the next 7 to 10 days, you'll also see their logos there with links to their website. So thank you again to all of our sponsors. Be sure to check them out, find out the services that they can provide, and just say thanks to them. So we're going to have a very packed webinar today in terms of topics and speakers. We've got a great lineup of speakers with us today, but I want to tell you first about who CCI is, just in case you don't know. We are the Canadian Condominium Institute, and we are an independent nonprofit organization that was formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country, 8 alone in Ontario, and CCI Huronia is one of those Ontario chapters. Our main objective is education, and CCI also, in addition to providing education to condo owners, board members, property managers, and those in the condo industry, we also advocate for condos, and we represent all of those involved, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. Speaking of education, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that CCI Huronia is putting on their 2-day intensive director's course in April 22nd and 23rd. So we're not going to be having a lunch and learn webinar in April. You'll have to come back in May and join us when we talk about insurance. But our 2-day intensive director's course takes place over the weekend. It's online. Details of the course agenda is now posted on our website, and registration is open. The cost of the course includes 2 of the fundamental courses under the new CCI Director Certificate Program that was launched this year. And this certificate program is a new initiative by the Canadian Condominium Institute. It includes 8 Ontario-wide fundamental courses. And on completion of all of the courses, you will be awarded a CCI Condominium Director Certificate. This certificate will demonstrate your commitment to your corporation and your willingness to go above the minimum standards required by the Condominium Authority of Ontario. And in addition, it will mean that your community can be rest assured that you understand all aspects of condominium governance and best practices, and that you have the skills needed to oversee the corporation as the director. So at our intensive course in April, we are going to be taking on 2 of those qualifying courses. On the Saturday, we're going to be dealing with the 101 course, which is the Governance Fundamentals course. And on the Sunday, we're going to be completing the 108 course, which is the Repair, Maintenance, and Change Fundamentals course. So as a special promotion and to recognize the launch of this new program, we are including the cost of these 2 courses in our 2-day intensive director's course. So when you join us on April 22nd and 23rd, you will have completed 2 of the 8 required courses, and you're 2 steps closer to getting your condominium director certificate. Also, during our director's course, we will also be having our Ask the Experts lunch panel. We'll be having a session on enforcement. We'll have an Ask the Auditor session. There will be case studies on storage lockers in garages and EV charging stations. We'll also be tackling the topic of insurance, reserve funds, and we'll be ending the 2 days with a special session on conflict de-escalation and proposals for changes to protect directors. And we're going to have someone from the Barrie Police Force joining us on the topic of de-escalation and how to de-escalate situations of conflict. And we also have Bill Thompson, and anybody that's been involved with CCI over the years, you will know who Bill Thompson is. He's going to be joining us for that session as well. Now, if you're not a member of CCI and you want to experience the benefits of membership, please check out one of your local chapters, or if you want to join CCI Huronia, just go to our website, ccihuronia.com. And one of the benefits of membership is preferred pricing. So for our director's course, the cost of the 2-day director's course is $125 for members. But if you're a non-member, it's $300. So you can save the cost of your membership just by signing up and registering for the course. And if you need to find a chapter near you, you can go to our national website, which is cci.ca. And while you're on that website, you might want to check out the National Resource Center, which has a great deal of material available for review relating to condo related issues. And the articles that are posted there are from our chapters across the country. And again, the national website is cci.ca. Don't forget to follow CCI Huronia on Facebook. Join us on LinkedIn to find out about our upcoming events, and always check out our website, ccihuronia.com. You can find our Condo Buzz newsletter on our website, as well as our previous recordings. And just a reminder to everyone that today's webinar is being recorded. It will be posted in the next 7 to 10 days. So today, we are going to focus our discussion on short-term rentals. And last month, our webinar was focused on tenants in condos. And so now we're going to move to the topic of short-term rentals, which is a very popular topic these days. If you take a look at the media, recent media stories, we've had the Montreal fire that happened just a couple of days ago that involved a building that was housing a lot of illegal short-term rentals, although that wasn't a condominium. Still, issues there still apply. And we have Michele Farley with us today, who's going to be talking about that fire and lessons learned. And also there was a media story earlier this month featured on City News talking about a condo in Toronto, which imposed some new rules regarding short-term rentals, including a 15% fee on total booking costs, which was going to be passed on to the condo and put into the condo's contingency fund to pay for capital repairs and improvements, as well as the cost of security. And in addition, the condo imposed a restriction that limited the short-term rental platform owners could use to Airbnb. Now, not all owners were happy about these changes, but according to the board, as reported in the story, the changes were necessary to deal with some troubling incidents, noise complaints, and damage to building. And the board believed that these new changes will provide oversight to keep the condo safe. So, it's interesting that, this story of short-term rentals in condos, it's not something that just has happened or is something that's brand new. They've been around for a long time, but they are coming up in the media. So today, we're going to be tackling this topic. And as I said, we've got a great lineup of speakers. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you're going to understand the difference between short-term rentals and tenants in condos, and how you need to deal with them and the various different issues that you need to deal with. So before we get on to our first speaker, a couple of reminders. If you don't want any chance of your image being shown, please shut off your video. Make sure your mic is shut off so that we can get a nice clean recording. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. All of our speakers are going to be monitoring the chat box throughout the webinar. We will try and answer your questions then. If we have some time at the end, we'll take some questions live. And also just a reminder that the information today that you're hearing and that's being provided by our speakers is general information, and it may not apply to your specific fact situation. If you're a condo director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Act, you do need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your own professionals. The webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions that would protect you under Section 37 of the Act. In addition, the information provided today is current as of March 24th, 2023. So if you're watching a recording of this webinar down the road, just make sure you contact your professionals to make sure the information is still applicable. And also, please be advised that any references to the Condominium Act or other legislation today, that is a reference to Ontario legislation. So let's get started with our first topic, and that is the impact and challenges of short-term rentals from a property manager's perspective and a rental manager's perspective, and how to minimize those impacts. And we have Jeff Struewing and Jodie Kennedy from Hodis Law Property Management with us today, and they're going to tackle this first topic. So Jeff, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thanks, Sonja, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Short-term rentals in condominiums can be problematic for property managers and boards in some cases. For everybody's reference, most municipalities refer to a short-term rental as less than 30 days. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through today's session. Having a good rental management can often alleviate many of the issues, but before considering short-term rentals in any condominium, it's very important to ensure it's permitted. Many municipalities have introduced bylaws prohibiting or governing what they refer to as STAs, short-term accommodations. Condominiums may also have governing documents that prohibit them or limit the length or frequency. At Hodis Law, we have an in-house rental management division, which has been extremely beneficial as we get to see the full picture and adjust as we go in an effort to satisfy all parties. Different municipalities can be different from one another, so it's important to make sure you're on side with your local municipality. Similar to long-term tenants, you can have really good rental guests and you can have really bad rental guests. Some would say the problematic short-term rental guest is less impactful on the community than a problematic long-term tenant, as they will be gone much sooner. However, if a unit is frequently occupied by problematic short-term guests, the impact on the community can be more significant. With that said, having open communication between the property manager and the rental manager, these issues can be recognized and managed quickly with solutions that can actually curb these types of issues from happening in the future. Most commonly, the issues that arise with STA guests include excessive noise, parking, waste, unit owners that don't screen guests well or don't utilize a rental manager that does, can lead to rowdy guests, overcrowding of units and amenities, parking problems, and sometimes improper disposal of waste and recycling. If the condominium and municipality allow for STAs, working with the unit owners to encourage good rental management and gaining their support to maintain a safe, enjoyable, and harmonious community can avoid a lot of complaints and displeasure for owners who do not participate in the rental programs. Most common issues that arise with STA guests, already covered that one. Having a clear and relevant rules in place and making sure guests are provided a copy of condo rules and adhered to them is essential. Some boards have developed bylaws to govern STAs within the condominium and can serve to enhance those provisions that municipality may already have in place. Adding a harassment policy is also something to consider. These should be discussed with the corporation's lawyer and tailored to the condominium specifically. I'll now ask Jodie to speak to the rental manager's perspective, which will include issues they face and how these types of issues can be avoided.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for having me today to speak about short-term rentals from a rental management perspective. So yes, we have an in-house rental management division. The benefit to our clients in having both an in-house rental management division and a condo management division is that we understand the full picture from all perspectives. So we understand that open and direct communications, the ability to access the unit in emergency situations, and developing strategies to ensure that all parties are taken into consideration every step of the way are all key factors to success in short-term rental management. So some of the challenges that we face in rental management specifically are third-party booking channels such as Airbnb, VRBO do not allow for a proper vetting process like you would see in a long-term or seasonal rental. So as a host, you can't contact guests outside of the platform, which means you need to rely on previous host reviews to determine if a guest has a track record of partying, not following rules, or damaging property, etc. In order to have your listing appear in the top search results, third-party platforms would prefer you to have an instant booking feature turned on, which means that guests can instantly book similar to an Expedia or a hotel, rather than being pre-approved by a rental manager. So it's a balancing act. You can either turn on the instant booking feature and mitigate risk in a different way, or you turn it off, but you're not featured as much to get booked by the guest. Noise complaints are one of the most common situations that we deal with. This typically happens after 11 p.m., which in our town is the local bylaws quiet time. Parking is another common issue for guests, owners, and property managers. So if a unit sleeps 6 to 7 people and those people are coming in from different places at different times, there can be 2 to 3 vehicles and only 1 to 2 parking spaces available. And communication, I mean, I think in any business, but communication is arguably the biggest factor in determining the success or failure of your short-term rental accommodation. So I'll move into solutions, technology being a big one. So rental management software, we use Guesty, which is a calendar manager, but also includes automated and scheduled messaging. This helps to communicate with your guests from the time that they book to the time that they check out, and even follow up on messages asking for direct feedback. The benefit to the automated communications is that we remind them several times about following rules that we've set out with them from the time of booking to the time they check out. Another piece of technology that we have found to be absolutely critical to the success of mitigating like noise complaints and stuff like that is a noise monitoring system. So we use something called Minute, which is a noise monitoring system that is fit to the ceiling, similar to a fire alarm. And we place it in the main room in the house. We use the app to set appropriate decibel levels based on the time of day. And if the noise levels go over the settings that we've set for more than 5 minutes, then an alarm is sounded to the host and an automated message is sent to the guest, warning them to keep the noise down. And this escalates as it goes on to the point that it can contact our emergency contact, who would then go directly to the property to stop that right in its tracks. If the system is tampered with in any way by the guest, an alarm is also sounded to the host and the guest, and an automated message is sent to the guest as well. The noise monitoring system also detects the amount of devices connected to the Wi-Fi system, which will help in a way understand how many guests may be there, meaning that if we have 6 guests allowed in that property and it's detecting, typical guest will have about 4 devices. So if there's 6 guests and there's 24 devices, or there's 36 devices, there may be an issue there. So that's one of the benefits to that. And we have clear communication in our online descriptions and clearly posted at a property level that we have these noise monitoring systems in place for preventative measures. Since implementing this device, we have had no additional noise complaints. And so that's been a major plus for us. And then another piece of key technology is a keyless entry system, such as a Schlag smart lock. This is key to the success of the short-term rental. We can monitor and track all incoming and outgoing guests. We can remotely unlock the door if the guest can't get in, and we can set master codes for the PMs in case of an emergency. Because guest codes change all the time, and the master code never changes. So that's critical when it comes to accessing the unit for emergency situations. The next thing is communication. So for guests especially, clear and concise communication from the start with a guest is vital to ensuring that they understand and follow the specific rules of the property. This includes a good property description on each booking channel, a house guide located in the short-term rental accommodation, posted signage within the rental property, and key messages sent throughout the booking journey from the time the guest books to the time they check out. These are short little messages, just a reminder, follow the house rules, just a reminder, we don't accept pets. Here are the pool rules. Here are the key condo rules. and your emergency contacts. So with the emergency contact information, the guest should have a dedicated emergency contact in case something goes wrong. The property manager for the condo should have an emergency contact information for the rental manager, especially if this rental manager is not in-house. If the owner is not using a rental manager, the onus should be on the owner to ensure that the PM has both access to the unit, which means if it's a keyed entry, then you need to provide a master key. And if it's a smart code or a smart lock, then you need to make sure that we either have a master code or the ability to create our own code. The rental manager should have the contact info for the PM in case of an emergency if they're not in-house, which means that if the owner is not looking after the property themselves, then they should provide written permission to the property manager that the point of contact is the rental manager. So I'll just say in conclusion, having an experienced rental manager looking after your property versus an individual owner can make all the difference in the world when it comes to the success of a short-term rental accommodation. A rental manager has seen and heard it all. They understand the need for proactive communications with guests and property managers, easy access to the units in case of an emergency, understanding and implementing systems that clearly outline house rules and condo rules, and smart home solutions, including noise monitors and smart lock entry systems, and dedicated contacts for emergency situations. And thank you.
Thanks, Jodie. There was a question about what was the name of that noise monitoring system you mentioned. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat as well. It's called Minute, M-I-N-U-T. I believe it's a Swiss company, but I can put it in the chat.
Okay, great. That's great. Thanks. So there's some other questions in the chat, I think, for you too. So thanks for that, Jodie and Jeff. I mean, it's interesting that, some condos want to allow short-term rentals. So if you're going to go down that path of allowing short-term rentals, the comments made by Jeff and Jodie today are definitely things to consider on how to manage that. Let's turn to our next topic, which is the question of whether or not municipal regulations actually help condos when it comes to short-term rentals. We do have some municipalities. We know Toronto has some regulations up in our area. Collingwood and Blue Mountains have regulations when it comes to short-term rentals. And so we've got Patricia Elia with us today from Elia Associates, and she's going to first address this question about whether the municipal regulations that are in place, are they actually helping condos? Patricia?
Thanks very much. And thanks, Jodie and Jeff. That was very educational. Now I know something more. And you probably solved the noise dispute issue in all condos with that software. So it'll be good. So the town of Blue Mountain, I'm going to focus on them. And as Sonja has mentioned, there are quite a few municipalities that are responding to this issue. And those of you who've tracked Toronto, you've seen how they've tried to put a cap on how short-term rental accommodations are going to be managed. Primarily, the key element in the Toronto issue is that it has to be your principal residence. So with that said, the town of Blue Mountain has a short-term accommodation licensing bylaw that provides for a system of licensing of short-term accommodations, or STAs. The STA objectives include, but not limited to, ensuring occupants are provided with safe accommodation, ensuring STA premises are operated and maintained in a sanitary and acceptable level of interior conditions as per property standards, ensuring the STA operators are made aware of their responsibilities to comply with the town and bylaws and other regulations, protecting the character, amenities, and quality of existing residential neighborhoods, and creating an equal playing field for all STA operators, and providing an enhanced consumer protection. The town enacted the STA in July of 2014. The STA bylaw applies to owners who rent their properties for 30 days or less. Municipal law enforcement is provided by the Enforcement Services Department of the town of Blue Mountain, who aims to protect and provide a desired quality of life for residents. So this is a little bit of the policy standard. The Municipal Act of 2001 provides municipalities with the broad authority to delegate powers and duties subject to certain restrictions. Delegation of minor matters may allow councils to streamline decisions and focus on larger matters, but the delegation builds on a municipality's authority to create local bodies to help with decision making, in addition with administrative matters. So a municipality possesses discretion in deciding also whether to enforce its bylaws. The mere passing of a bylaw does not at law create any duty on the municipality to see its enforcement. That's supported by case law. As a result, local governments may determine to prosecute some residents for breaches of a bylaw, but not others. Perceived inequality of enforcement will offer no defense to an accused. And the rationale for this discretion was explained by the Ontario Court of Appeal in Toronto and Pillai, where the court found that the municipal council had discretion as to when it would enforce the provisions of a zoning bylaw. So what does that mean for the condos? It means that you have a system in place and municipalities are responding to the need to ensure that, other neighbors, adjacent communities are not negatively impacted. Because what we've seen is that these units are now like inventory in a commercial operation, right? But at the same time, they're valuable. They're valuable even for people who are planning for retirement. They're trying to build equity. They're trying to plan ahead. So we see that there's an economic need to develop these. But, with that said, we also have to think about, enforcement and do these programs work if they're not enforced? And I think this is where the challenge is and where some of the gaps are that we've been talking about between the fourth level of government, and that's the condo, and the municipality is the third level. Municipalities don't have endless dollars, and nobody wants to pay more in property taxes necessarily to develop those infrastructure or resources. So municipalities have flex to enforce or not enforce, but at the same time, set people up with the expectation that these programs are there for a purpose, to manage the issues and the concerns that I talked about at the beginning. So, where we need to reconcile is how do we manage at the fourth level of government? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in our presentation, but whether or not we also are putting in place at a municipal level meaningful programs. I think that the town of Blue Mountain has done the right thing. I think that they've done a great job in designing this because it is a resort city. It is a tourist attraction. People are coming and they want to visit the town of Blue Mountain. So it's inevitable. So let's do it in a way that it's safe. And Jeff was just telling me before the call that the town of Blue Mountain has been really rigorous in making sure that exits from basement units are able to be accessed by anybody. So they can climb up. So it's not good enough, for example, that the window is big enough, but that they actually have a way to get to the window. And I think, Michelle's going to talk about a more serious issue a little bit later, but it shows the importance of enforcement. And even at the front end, I think the challenge of what I've heard from clients is that in the town of Blue Mountain, where the challenge lies is on a Friday night after 4:00 when the noise has gotten too high, there's nobody coming from the town to enforce the program because they may just not have the resources. So when I, speak a little bit later, we'll talk about how to fill that gap at the condo level and build on what Jodie and Jeff have said. Thanks, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia. So let's move on now to actually programs that are in place, not based on the municipality, but based on options that Airbnb has. And we have Josh Milgrom from Lash Condo Law with us today, and he's going to talk about the Friendly Buildings program that Airbnb has and his experience with it. Josh?
Okay, thanks, Sonja. This was the program that Sonja mentioned earlier on in the intro, and I know someone asked about it. So the program is now called the Resident Hosting Program. When it was first introduced here, it was called the Friendly Buildings Program. And the program is sort of like a partnership between a condo corp and Airbnb. And I'm only aware of a couple Toronto condos that are currently participating in the program, but there may be others as well. It's geared more towards high volume short-term rental buildings where short-term rentals are explicitly permitted, and perhaps where Airbnb has a bit more of a stake in making sure that short-term rentals are a little bit more streamlined and managed in a particular building. One of the issues, I know it came up in a question as well, is that short-term rentals there's often very little visibility into the activities by a condo corp. And so condo corps are often left in the dark with owners who don't share all of the information that they ought to share pertaining to short-term rental accommodation activity going on in their units. So for this program, there's really two parts to the program. One is the agreement itself between Airbnb and the condo corp. And the other is a rule or a provision in the governing documents which requires owners to use to basically give Airbnb exclusivity over short-term rental activity in the building, so that the condo corp can manage all of the short-term rental activity through that agreement and program. So there's a few key elements to the deal from the condo corp side. One is access to information and control over rental activity. Another is insurance coverage. And then the third piece is a revenue sharing model. And I'll talk about each one of those. So a huge benefit to the condo corp here is the information side, the information that the corporation gets access to. It actually enables the condo corp to have access to a portal through the Airbnb system with information about bookings and guests, dates for checking in and checking out. So there's a wealth of information that the condo gets access to when they're involved in this program, which means the corporation is better able to manage its property, to keep track of issues, to deal with compliance issues that might come up. And the benefit isn't just for the condo corp, there's also the host and the guest side of things. It removes a number of roadblocks that might be involved in the check-in process and in information that owners or operators have to give to the condo corp, because it all is managed through the Airbnb platform. One interesting benefit of the program that condos wouldn't otherwise get access to is the ability to suspend problematic listings in certain situations. So if somehow an owner keeps renting to guests that are too noisy and breach the rules, there's actually a way for the condo corp to request that Airbnb suspend that listing for a period of time. So we're able to sort of go straight to the source of dealing with that issue. The condo corp also gets personnel from Airbnb to help assist with issues that might come up in individual rentals or the program more generally. So that's another big perk there. The insurance side of things is also important for condos that are worried about damage to the property through short-term rental activity. So as we all know, condo corps are responsible to insure the common elements and all the standard units. But through this program, the condo is actually able to benefit from Airbnb's host damage protection. They're a sort of built-in insurance policy that they have. So that could sort of kick in to cover some damage that might otherwise have to go through the condo corp's insurance, which would save the condo corp some unforeseen expenses associated with short-term accommodation activity. And then the last sort of perk I think that's really important to mention is the revenue share for the condo. So Sonja mentioned this one particular situation in Toronto that was in the news recently. They have a 15% revenue sharing model where Airbnb actually collects and remits 15% of the booking fee directly to the condo corp. And this is designed to help offset some of the increased costs associated with short-term rental in the building. There at this particular condo corp, there's lots of short-term rental activity. So there's additional administration requirements, security requirements, wear and tear on the common elements. All of those result in some increased costs for the condo corp that is offset by that revenue sharing model. And so that sort of, I guess, leads into some of the potential downsides of the program or cons. So really, it's about potential pushback from owners, I think. And so one of those issues is Airbnb's exclusivity for short-term rental accommodation in the building. They're obviously a big player in the short-term rental market. But some owners might prefer to list their units on different platforms rather than being stuck with Airbnb. So there's potential pushback from owners on that side. And then the other one is the revenue sharing. Owners who are engaging in short-term rentals probably don't want to, share some of that revenue or income with the condo corps. But as I mentioned, there are increased costs associated with short-term rental accommodations. So I think it's reasonable to allow the condo corp to offset some of those costs through this program. But of course, it is an aspect of the program that could be subject to some pushback from owners. So from a board perspective, it's something that needs to be managed and communicated with your owners to try to sort of smooth that out. So I think the program is really great at helping condos deal with some of the issues that might come up from time to time. I'll actually put in a couple links into the chat to Airbnb's website on the program if anyone is interested in having a look at those as well.
Thanks, Josh. And it's great to know that if you want to go again down the route of allowing short-term rentals, there's some programs in place that actually can make it a productive exercise. Are you aware of any other platforms other than Airbnb that have something similar to this friendly buildings program, or is Airbnb the only one?
I personally am not aware of it. And I know the program for Airbnb is quite popular in the States. There's lots of community associations or condos in the States that are involved. In Canada, I think it's still quite limited, but I'm not aware of any other platforms.
All right. So that might be another reason to stick to that platform for now anyway. Well, thanks, Josh, for sharing information about the Friendly Buildings program and your experience with it. We also are going to look now to the side of what if you want to ban short-term rentals and you don't want to have short-term rentals on your property. And we're going to go back to Patricia, who is going to talk about that issue and what you need to do with your governing docs in order to be able to do it. Patricia?
Thanks very much. And it's sad news that it's too late. No, I'm just kidding. There are ways to manage these issues. And what you need to look at the front end is identifying what type of a condominium you actually have. When you look through the case law since 1994 dealing with short-term rentals, you can see how the courts rely on components of the constating documents. And this is where you have that freedom. So look in your declaration. There are generally, three types of wording that you will find. Private single family dwelling is magic. That is the no Airbnb. As per city bylaws, this is permissive, but can be narrowed and focused and then expressly permitted, because there are condominiums that were designed with transient use in mind. And we see that more and more in new condos that are designed that way. But after you figure that out, if you want to stop it, you would have to, for example, make sure your declaration is clear. And we've done declaration amendments that say no short-term rentals. But then you have to also, if you are going to allow it, and even if you're not allowing it, you have to think about your bylaws and your rules. So let's talk about no Airbnb. What do you need to see there? You need to see a bylaw and rules that make that very clear, and where the courts have taken this. And the MTCC 1385 and Skyline case is a beautiful example of how the Court of Appeal, if you read that decision, architected how the rule upheld the concept of private single family dwelling, but was able to narrow and focus what that meant without violating the declaration. Because that was what Skyline's argument was, is that there was a violation. But the people who bought into that condo did not realize that Skyline had bought such a big proportion and that they planned on running it like a hotel. And that's where the risk was. It was the transient use, the strangers, the maid carts, the wear and tear, etc. So that's where you can hone in and create layers that actually help inform everybody as to what is the meaning of short-term rental, what is permitted, and if it's not, that it's not, and what is private single family dwelling, because there you also have to look at the case law about who is a family. And we've gone down that path. Sonja knows it well. But then what you need to do is also have rules. You have to have rules that are enforceable. And that's where we've been creative. We've been creative on the bylaw and the rule portion in closing this gap between even what the municipality will do. Let's say you have a framework in place. You still have the right to govern your condominium and set the parameters. And, I talked about the Municipal Act, but one key thing about the municipality, it can't create more rights than what you choose to give it within your condo. So, we've done some creative designing in bylaws for short-term rentals and condos in Huronia, where the corporation sets the parameters of what this interpretation will mean in the context of the condo to be able to manage where people abuse the system. Because you do have to bring in line the rental agents, but who is responsible at the end of the day? The unit owner. So you need to be able to have rules that are architected in such a way that it comes back to the unit owner and can be enforced against the unit owner. At the end of the day, we know that the resolutions can be everything from, don't do that again, to you have to sell your unit because you don't belong in this community because you can't manage it. So what you need to be able to do is have rules that allow for council, if that council gets involved, to be able to say it was abundantly clear, these are the rules, and that they were breached. So in terms of designing the right system, you will need to look at the deck, the bylaws, rules, make sure they integrate, that they don't breach the act, and that you are actually, staying on path with what the declaration provides for. That is really the art of this drafting. I think that's it for me, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia. It all comes back down to the deck, huh?
Uh-huh.
The importance of that declaration. All right, so let's shift the webinar a little bit in terms of topic discussions to some other things that you need to think about when it comes to short-term rentals. And one of the big issues in condos always is insurance. And so we've got Tom Gallinger here from Atrens-Counsel today, and he's going to talk about insurance considerations when it comes to short-term rentals. Tom?
That's great. Thank you, Sonja. Yeah, folks, when you're talking about insurance with respect to condominiums and we're talking about short-term rentals, I mean, the one big thing that we look at is we look at exposure, we look at what is the risk. When you're looking at a condominium corporation, say you've got a baseline condominium corporation. It's designed to be owner occupied. They receive a certain level of pricing based on, the risk factors involved there. You've got owners that own the building, that manage the community. You've got that pride of ownership. So you've got a baseline condominium corporation. If you compare that to, say, an apartment building, being, rental, 100% rental, normally annual leases. An exactly similarly designed apartment building versus a condominium, the apartment's probably going to pay anywhere from 75% to 150% more in their insurance premium than the condominium is going to pay. And then by virtue of that, again, that's your sort of annual leases. So you're seeing that, the insurance companies are attaching some additional risk-based pricing to the apartment building. Well, what happens if we look at hotels? Hotels would be even higher pricing. Hotels would be probably 150 to 300% versus that baseline condominium that we established. So now you're starting to see really how the insurance companies perceive, the risk factors that are associated with those type of occupancies. So when we look at short-term rentals, those are some of the things that sort of come to my mind. Again, in a condominium corporation, insurance companies like organization and they like order. So if there is, some structure around that, if the rental of units is being controlled, that tends to be more favorably looked upon. And keep in mind that condominium corporations, even though they're residential properties, When insurance is purchased for a condominium corporation, it's purchased in the commercial marketplace. Because of the size of these sites and the values involved, we go out into the commercial marketplace, and so they look at things a little bit differently. They don't necessarily have a checklist. They're going to look at geographical risk factors involved. They're going to look at some other risk factors that may be present, and rentals and or short-term rentals might be one of those factors. So it really all depends on the insurance companies, their appetite, how much they look into those factors. And then another thing, that the big thing in the commercial marketplace they look at is what type of claims activity has the condominium had in the past. So even if your insurance company is not surcharging your pricing because you have rentals or short-term rentals in the site, you need to consider what type of additional exposure are you putting on the condominium? What additional risk factors are we presenting here that could lead to insurance claims? Because again, the more claims you have in the long run, the higher premium the corporation is going to have to pay, the higher deductibles they may have, and of course those deductibles could be charged back to the owners, and that presents higher exposure to the owners and potentially higher cost to the owners that contribute into that insurance policy. So it may or may not have a direct impact on the corporation's premium, again, depending on the underwriting appetite of the insurance companies that they deal with. But it is important to look at those risk factors and to consider, how are we managing those so that we're not presenting additional risk to the condominium corporation. One of the other things, other sides of the coin to look at is a unit owner. If you own a unit and you rent that unit out on an annual basis, or you rent that unit out on a short-term basis, is your coverage appropriate for that? Most unit owners, again, are going to have a regular, owner-occupied unit owner's policy, which is sort of your standard unit owner policy that you would purchase. Obviously, a number of different ways you can tailor the coverage. But those regular policies would not apply if you rent your unit out on a regular basis. So it's something very important to look into with your own personal insurance broker. There may be options for coverage through the provider. Providers such as AirBnB, as Josh had mentioned, do provide some coverage for liability or some coverage for property damage stemming from the particular rental. But it's important to take a look at that coverage. Is that appropriate for what I'm doing? Is the limit sufficient? Are the coverages that they provide in that sort of bulk package that they have available for Airbnb hosts, is that coverage appropriate for me? Does it include things like the chargeback of the corporation deductible? Because if I rent out my unit and somebody does something in that rental, and the corporation decides they're going to charge back the corporation deductible to my unit, well, they're going to charge that back to the unit owner. So that's something important as well to consider. Do you have the right coverage in place? And again, there's so many different variations that it's important, again, to if you're doing short-term rentals, take a sophisticated approach to it, have some controls in place, and have a good communication with your insurance broker or agent about what you're doing, and make sure that they take a look at the coverage that you have available.
Thanks, Tom. And, like you always say, it's about managing risk to manage costs. And whether you're the owner or the condo corp, if you're going to have short-term rentals, you got to look at those risks, talk to your insurance broker, make sure you're properly covered, and make sure that the costs are not going to outweigh those risks that exist. So thanks for joining us, Tom. And Tom's going to be back in May with us when we talk about insurance. So if you want to know more about insurance, or you have more insurance related questions, join us in May when Tom comes back to talk about insurance for our webinar. Okay, so now we're moving on to another issue that we need to consider, and especially in light of the Montreal fire that's in the news right now. There's fire safety issues when we have short-term rentals, and we've got Michele Farley with us today, who is our resident fire safety expert. Michele, what do you have to say about what happened in Montreal when it comes to condos and short-term rentals?
Well, this topic has never been more timely than it is following the fire in Quebec last week, which Rescue is made far more complicated by the amount of short-term rentals in the building. And although this building's not a condo building, it highlights some of the challenges that we face when it comes to short-term rentals and fire safety. For those who may not be familiar with the situation, a fire broke out in a 3-story building in Old Montreal around 5:45 on Thursday, March 16th, and it took firefighters 4 hours to bring the blaze under control. This morning, the police updated that there were at least 3 people still missing. 4 of them have been confirmed deceased, among those who are presumed to be living in or visiting to the 15-unit building. Much of it was rented out as short-term dwellings. 9 people were injured, 2 seriously remain in hospital. So let's look at some of the possible failures of this fire and steps that could have been taken to address these issues and how the short-term rentals in the building really complicated the situation, especially for first responders. So firstly, the fire engulfed the stairwell, blocking the main exits of the units. And the father of a young woman who may still be missing after the fire swept through the building said he was told his daughter had called 911 twice within several minutes, unable to get out of the unit they were staying in, which had no windows or a fire escape. But the lawyer for the building's owner said the building's layout was complex, but he wrote that regarding the exits, that it had been passed and deemed compliant, previously. So there was also a woman who was staying in the building with her husband, and she felt very lucky to be alive. She said her husband was awakened Thursday around 5:30 a.m. by a loud noise, and then saw the glow under the door, and the couple escaped a semi-basement through a window. And she said there was really no way out, that the staircase was on fire, so they had to break the window. She said she noticed there were 2 fire alarms in the unit when she arrived, but they never thought to question whether they were working. She said the alarms never went off. She remembered thinking, where are the alarms? Or why I'm not hearing anything? And she'd seen 2 in the unit, so why didn't they go off? But the lawyer for the building has confirmed that there is an alarm system. It was replaced in 2019 and that it was tested regularly. So the third thing really is the firefighters originally believed that only 1 person was missing, but that was later learned that several of the apartments were being used as short-term rentals, which weren't recorded. So they've told reporters that police don't know how many are actually missing, how many were tourists and were staying in the short-term rentals, and how many actually lived in the building permanently. They're still figuring out this information. And this really complicated the search and rescue efforts and the ability to confirm how many people were still missing. So in the case of short-term rentals, who is responsible? And what could have been done differently to avoid this tragedy? So these are great questions, and we're just going to go through them briefly. But the fire code states that the owner is ultimately responsible. And in cases where renting out your unit under the fire code, the landlord becomes responsible. And it outlines in section 6342 that despite the definition of owner, the article 1412 of Division A in the case of rental dwelling units, only the landlord shall be considered to be the owner for the purpose of the subsection. The subsection states that the landlord shall test smoke alarms annually and after every change in tenancy. Also, that the landlord must check any CO detectors and alarms, and also annually and after every change in tenancy. So in the case we just discussed, city officials said the Airbnb short-term rentals are illegal and in an area where the building is located. The lawyer for the building's owner said Sunday that the Airbnb's buildings were solely being operated by the tenants and not his client, and adding that steps had been taken to stop the practice. But in this case, the owner becomes the landlord under the fire code. So I've worked on similar cases in condos in Blue Mountain, Collingwood, and other areas. And in one of these cases, the 2 primary fire code safety challenges were the number of rental occupants in the building and the lack of fire safety equipment maintenance. The condominium corporation allowed for short-term rentals as long as they managed them according to the rules. But the fire department had issued a notice of violation to the unit owner only, not the corporation. And we worked with the corporation, the unit owner, and provided the following resolution. The owner would add to his rental agreement and post permanent signage in the unit, limiting the number of occupants permitted to stay within the unit. We trained his cleaning staff who went in the unit between rentals and or on a weekly basis and trained them how to test the smoke detectors, the CO detectors, the doors, and the egress routes. they would record this information on a form, which was kept locked in the unit furnace room. This was all included in a small fire safety planning document that was submitted to and approved by the local fire department. All the costs were directly paid by the unit owner. So whether you're opposed to short-term rentals or considering allowing them, having a clear rules is essential. So for the corporations, you've got to review your rules and fire code responsibilities and make sure they're included in your policies. Create clear policies and hold the unit owners and not the corporate, like hold the unit owners, not the corporation responsible, and have a violation policy to swiftly deal with repeat offenders. And have your fire safety plan include whether you permit short-term rentals or not and what your policies are. For short-term rental hosts, check to see the short-term rentals are allowed in your condo community. Have a plan in place for testing your smoke alarm, CO detectors, and according to the fire code. And how this is done depends on the type of devices that you have. For units that have battery operated or plug-in standalone devices, it's simple. But for units with devices that are interconnected or to a common system, this can be triggering the alarms in the entire building. So know what type of devices you have and what they can test and whether you're implementing that or not. Have an emergency plan, including escape plan, meeting place and emergency procedures, and provide this to the tenants, and prepare to communicate the number of guests and contact information to the authorities in the case of an emergency. And just to add, for short-term rental guests, which I know a lot of people here might be, it's always a good idea to look around and check and identify 2 ways out in the event of an emergency. And if possible, test the smoke alarm, CO detectors, or ensure that they have them in the unit and that they're working. So as Jeff said, there's good hosts and bad hosts. There's good renters and bad renters. And if your corporation's position on short-term rentals are clear and everyone knows and follows the rules, short-term rentals can be operated safely. By ensuring this includes fire code and fire safety implications, you're fulfilling your responsibility in keeping your people and your building safe. Thank you very much. Sonja?
Thanks, Michele. And, I think the last 3 speakers make it very clear that if you're going to allow short-term rentals in your condo, you need to sort of have a team approach in terms of how you're going to implement that. From your governing documents, you're going to be having your lawyer at the table. You're going to be having your insurance broker at the table to talk about the risks and how you manage those risks from an insurance perspective. But you also need your fire safety consultant at the table to make sure that your fire plan is properly addressing the short-term rental situation. So thank you, Michele, for those comments. And we're almost at the end of the webinar. I was going to talk about some cases that the courts have, when the courts have addressed short-term rentals. So I don't have time to go into a lot of detail on these cases, but I'm just going to give a couple highlights and then we're going to wrap up the webinar today. So the first thing I wanted to say is that short-term rentals, they've been around for a long time. This issue is not a new issue, although the popularity of short-term rentals is growing more recently, but we have cases dating back to 1994. MTCC 850 and Oikla was one of the first cases that dealt with the issue of short-term rentals. And as Patricia said, it really comes down to the declaration and the definitions that are in the declaration when it comes to the use of the unit. So in that case, the court said that the business executive suites type of renting units as an alternative to hotel accommodations was not consistent with a private single family dwelling use. And so they didn't allow it. And we also see that in 2016 in the Ottawa Carleton Standard Condo Corp 961 and Menzies case, where they say basically the same thing. The declaration says single family dwelling, short-term hotel-like accommodations are not consistent with that use. In that case, they upheld a 4-month minimum lease requirement. And I mentioned that because there's some cases coming down that address that issue about the minimum lease periods. So, in 2016, we have the court saying you can put rules in place to prevent short-term leasing as long as it doesn't alter the right of owners to lease to traditional tenants. And then in 2019, 2020, we start to see a lot more activity when it comes to short-term rentals. And we've got Kapoor versus Toronto Standard Condominium Corporation 2450, where they once again upheld short-term rental restrictions and said, once again, Hotel-like use is not consistent with single-family residences. And we have the Kumar decision in February of 2020 that again says it's reasonable for the board to place restrictions on short-term leasing. Then we get to Perot and Toronto Standard Condo Corp 2248 in 2020. And in this case, the court actually struck down a rule that restricted short-term rentals and limited rentals to 6 months. But the reason they did that is because they took a look at the declaration and at the governing documents, and they acknowledged that short-term rentals like Airbnbs are licenses and not leases, and that there's a difference between a license, like a short-term rental, and an actual lease where you have a landlord-tenant relationship. And the thing in this case is the declaration did not restrict the amount of time somebody could rent. So one of the lessons that came out of this case, and we see it in some other cases, is to focus on the use, not on the time period. And then we had the Cottage Advisors case in 2022, which was upheld by the Court of Appeal. And it's interesting because the court recognized that short-term rentals put an additional strain on common elements, and they allowed a bylaw that imposed a rental fee of $120 per unit for units that were rented, and an amenity fee of $310 a week for units that were rented. They also allowed the condo to charge a refundable damage deposit to renters. But they struck down the portion of the bylaw that restricted the owner's ability to advertise the units and restricted the owners to only go through a rental manager that was approved by the board. So all of these cases, really come down to one thing, and that's you've got to pay attention to what's in your declaration. And with the right declaration language, you can restrict or control short-term rental situations. And if your declaration language isn't what it needs to be, then you're going to need to amend the declaration to be able to do that. So in a very tight nutshell, with the limited amount of time that we've had left, that's sort of what the courts have been saying about short-term rentals. So there's no doubt that we can restrict them. We can ban them, but you've got to be really careful. You've got to go back to the foundations, as Patricia said, look at your governing docs, see what they say, and start there. And you may need to make amendments to your declaration. You may need to create bylaws. You may need to put rules in place or amend the ones you have to be able to enforce the restrictions. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As always, our webinars are a whirlwind. We know there was a lot of information that was thrown out, but thankfully, these webinars are recorded. So if you want to see this webinar again, it will be posted in the next 7 to 10 days. Feel free to share the webinar with anyone that you think will find it useful. But before we go, I want to take this opportunity once again to thank our sponsors. And without our sponsors, we can't put these webinars on free of charge. So thank you to Macintosh Perry, Registron Building Restoration Limited, Common Ground Condo Law, Brown & Beatty, Elia Associates Condominium Lawyers, and Nordic Windows and Doors. Also, don't forget to mark your calendar for our upcoming webinars and educational events. Our May webinar, which is on May 12th, we'll be discussing insurance. Tom's going to come back for that one. On June 16th, we're going to be talking about nuisances and condos. So mark your calendars. Note, we do not have a webinar, Lunch and Learn webinar in April, but we do have our 2-day intensive director's course on April 22nd and 23rd. All of our webinars go from 12 to 1. And if you'd like to register for a webinar, just go to our website, cciharmonia.com, and you can register right online. And if you haven't had a chance to join us on Facebook, please do so. Join us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions about what's happening at CCI Huronia, or you have any suggestions for upcoming webinars, you can send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com. And if you want to get on our emailing list and you're not on it yet, also send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com and ask to be added. In terms of events at some of our other chapters, CCI Golden Horseshoe is going to have their lawyers' disputes and money on March 28th. You can go to cci-ghc.ca to register and get more information. Our friends in Ottawa are doing the Condo Directors course, courses 101 to 104 on April 15th. You can go to cci-easternontario.ca to register. Our friends in Windsor are doing a session on records, returns, and certificates on March 29th. You can go to cci-windsor.ca to register there. So until next time, I'm Sonja Hodis from the entire CCI family, wishing you a happy and safe weekend. And we hope to see you on May 12th when we discuss insurance. And we hope to see some, if not all of you, on our director's course, at our director's course on April 22nd and 23rd. Have a great day, everyone. And don't forget, CCI is your condo connection.